What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, the podcast that houses a safe and open listening platform for casual, cold, and dumb takes on the world of AEW, WWE, and the NFL, as well as the wide world of wrestling and sports in general. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Welcome to today's episode. Welcome to episode number 21. And if you missed last week, then you were in for a somewhat interesting, surprising, disappointing, depending on like who you liked, who you disliked, and who you support. It was a mixed weekend for you people, because last week, because it's been a week since this happened. Well, if you could tell by the title, by the thumbnail, by the hat I'm wearing the team that I always have rooted for in the San Francisco 49ers. The NFL draft, the 2021 NFL draft from Cleveland, Ohio, has gone. It's been about a week since it has happened, and I have come on here to give my thoughts, my reactions from specifically day one, because day one is where all the hype has centered around, and personally I'm the most interested in everything that happens in day one of the NFL draft. Day 2 and 3, there are a couple of things that kind of stood out to me. Day 3, not so much. I will say day 3, which happened on my birthday, I would periodically check on rounds 4 to 7, but when you look at rounds 4 to 7, not many people tune in. And when you go through rounds 4 and 7, you're pretty much, as a team, you're pretty much getting those support players and trying to find those players that you can see as support or maybe gems. You never know, because, for example, you got George Kittle in the 5th round, you got Tom Brady in the 6th round. You can always find those gems, those gem players in day 3, and not everyone can turn out like a star, even if you draft them day 1 or day 2. But yeah, that's pretty much how I saw the NFL draft in general, and not just this past weekend, but that's just how I see it. I'm mainly interested in day 1. And day 2, it's pretty 50-50. Day 3, I'm not very interested, but it all depends on how each drafted player performs on the field, how they do short and long term, and that's what I'm personally interested to see. Not the statistics, not how they did in college, and well, even though I did the scouting, it's way different in the next level. It is really different in the next level. So as for this episode, we're gonna be talking about day 1 of the NFL draft, some overall winners, losers, neutrals. When I mean neutrals, like they're both winners and losers, because I have some questions about this certain team's draft strategy, and some questions going forward about some teams, some players, what have you. So we're gonna be talking about the 2021 NFL draft, and we're gonna talk about those main sub areas that I just mentioned. But before we do, let's get into dumb plugs, what you gotta do to support the show, because it would mean the world to me. So as always, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell if you're watching this on YouTube, so you'll be notified of each and every episode that comes out, along with exclusive YouTube videos that come out here on the Very Cold Lasagna YouTube channel. And if you're listening to this podcast on the audio side of things, I appreciate the support, especially on Anchor. I really appreciate all the listens on Anchor. So continue to listen on Anchor, as well as Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Keep on listening. Keep on listening on the road. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. So let's get into today's topic. Recapping the 2021 NFL draft from my perspective, this average NFL fan's mind perspective, my vision, what I personally saw from the weekend, specifically day 1, because again, that's what I'm personally invested in. That's what I took my entire time on Thursday, April 29th to go deep into, because honestly, as a casual, that's the one thing that everyone is looking forward to in the NFL draft. Sure, again, like I mentioned before, there are players that are well talented, like hidden gems in the later rounds, and especially the much later rounds. But everyone really gets excited, really gets hyped for day one, the very first day of the NFL draft, because it signals the future. These are potentially franchise changing guys, or maybe they're just big time busts that we'll figure out eventually that they're big time busts. So we're in Cleveland, Ohio for the NFL draft. The fans, it is very nice to see the fans in Cleveland. They're all fully vaccinated. They're wearing masks and all that, and so that's good for them. And it feels like the good old days. It feels return to tradition, you know. So Roger Goodell comes out, you know, he gets the traditional boos that he often gets, and he's actually encouraging it. So I don't know if he's gotten used to that, but that's besides the point. So then we get to the very first pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, it's expected. They went to Trevor Lawrence from Clemson. They picked their hopefully franchise quarterback. I've mentioned it time and time again how there are some weaknesses with Trevor Lawrence, especially with reading defenses and trying to get through his first read, trying to like staying on his receivers like too long. But there are some very good pros about Trevor Lawrence that they outweigh the cons that hopefully he can fix in the NFL. So the Jaguars picked Trevor Lawrence, and as for the Jets, well, at number 2, we already knew who they were going to pick the moment they traded Sam Darnold away to the Panthers, and that was BYU quarterback Zach Wilson. So the first 2 picks, pretty expected at that point. So the draft really began at number 3 with my San Francisco 49ers. And it was a really nerve-wracking moment. It was really nerve-wracking when those 10 minutes of anticipation were finally going to lead to our pick. Because the month-long wait of rumors, speculations, smoke screens from Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, all the BS from the moment the 49ers made that game-changing trade with Miami to go up from 12 to 3. All the BS, all of the glitz and glamour of this monumental trade, it was all finally going to be put to rest last Thursday night. Was it going to be Mac Jones? Was it going to be Trey Lance? Was it going to be Justin Fields? Who I was kind of like flabbergasted on last Thursday night. His draft stock fell, and we'll get into that in a bit. I'm just wondering, why did his draft stock fall? But anyway, were they going to go with the most pro-ready quarterback in Jones, but he didn't have much upside because he doesn't really fit the mold of the modern NFL, where you have to have good accuracy, actually great accuracy, but you also have to have good mobility, really good mobility to survive, not just in the pocket. Or were they going to go with Trey Lance, who has all those traits, but he's very unproven? Or were they going to go with that wild card in Justin Fields, the most experienced of the 3, but he had some concerns? And with the 3rd pick, as you know by now, and if you guys should follow me on Twitter. You guys really should follow the podcast on Twitter, because the 49ers selected, they made the right choice, and hopefully it turns out that way. They selected Trey Lance from North Dakota State, and I was so excited. I was so thankful that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch finally made a good decision in the draft. And I mean, yes, they made good choices with Nick Bosa and George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. But this was the pick that they really needed to nail, and they made the right decision. So all that media hype that everyone bought in to this Mac Jones bullcrap. Now, this is no disrespect to Mac Jones, but everyone was made into idiots on that night the moment Trey Lance went to the 49ers. So Lynch and Shanahan finally took a quarterback that was more adapted to today's NFL. They passed on Deshaun Watson. They passed on Patrick Mahomes in 2017. And all of that, all of those years led up to this. Now, if you watch this film, again, he's a very gifted passer. He can threaten the defense with both all-range passes and running. His running game, what he runs when necessary. When the pocket breaks down, will run that ball. But again, there are some concerns. He's kind of raw. Actually, he is very raw. He hasn't played a lot of tough competition, but he does take care of the football. With the 49ers, though, and I'm going to keep going on about this, if there are more developments in the offseason, I think they will have to keep Jimmy Garoppolo. For as much as I rag on about him, I think he is a really good guy. He really is a good human being. I mean, as much as I rag on about him about the player, because again, Trey has good upside, but I think he needs a quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo, not just from a player's perspective, but from a human's perspective. You know, the person Jimmy Garoppolo, that Trey Lance can be kind of like a aid to, like kind of like Jimmy Garoppolo can be a mentor to this coming season. So Kyle needs to do everything he can to get Trey Lance ready. He needs to get him ingrained into that very complex playbook. So it's a gamble for the 49ers, but once Trey Lance gets onto the field, whenever that is, I don't know if it'll be this season. It depends on how Jimmy Garoppolo does and whatever else happens, whether that's poor play or another injury. But at the end of the day, I'm happy with this pick. I see a lot of upside in Trey Lance, but then it also comes with a lot of risk. You don't know how he's going to do at the pro level. But if there are preseason games, I think there are three preseason games. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the sample that you'll see out of Trey Lance in those preseason games and whatever games that he will do, like mop up, if there is any chance that he gets to do that, we will know if that gamble will pay off. And if it does, then the 49ers offense will be a really dominant force again. But if not, then all we can say is that it didn't pay off. The Niners threw away 3 first-round picks to the Miami Dolphins. And, well, we took a gamble. It didn't work. And we'll have to try again. But in the end, I'm happy with this pick. I know a lot of people are happy with this pick. I know some people want Mac Jones, but it's whatever. It's in the past. All we can hope for the best is wish the best for both guys to succeed in this league. We'll get to Mac Jones in a bit because this turned out to be an interesting night for him. So with the 49ers Trey Lance pick at 3, in my opinion, it caused a very big ripple effect, at least in the first half of the draft. Because in the second half of the draft, it was pretty like kind of it was honestly, let's be real here. The second half of the draft, I'm kind of giving this away at this point because the second half of the draft was kind of there were not really too many surprises at this point. At that point, it was just defensive players. Pittsburgh took a running back, and yeah, that's pretty much all there is. It was just like the teams in the back half of the draft trying to find that player that can help them at a primary position need. So, speaking on the first half of the draft even further, that Niners pick at 3 caused that ripple effect, because at 4, the Atlanta Falcons, instead of taking a quarterback, because they could have taken either Justin Fields or Mac Jones, they took Florida tight end Kyle Pitts. And honestly, I'm actually glad they did, because they needed another playmaker in that offense. Now, on the flip side, Matt Ryan's not getting any younger. They do need to find a future franchise quarterback, a heir to Matt Ryan in Atlanta. But for now, I like this pick for the Falcons, because now you got Julio Jones, pending if he doesn't get traded. Then you also have Calvin Ridley on opposite sides in the receiving game. Then now you got Kyle Pitts, and he is a really good receiver. He's a really good receiver, but for his position at tight end, like he's not a good blocking tight end, but he's a really good receiving tight end. So I really like the pick here, right? The Falcons at 4, then the Bengals at 5. They were in a tough position. I really thought they were in a tough position, because they had to go either offensive line or wide receiver at this pick. They had to prioritize something in this spot. And personally, I don't have a problem with them taking Jamar Chase from LSU. Sure, he's reunited with Joe Burrow, his quarterback, during their college days. And honestly, they needed another receiver, a top receiver, because AJ Green is in Arizona now. So you got Jamar Chase. Like, he's a really good receiver. He fills that void AJ Green left. So not only that, again, with that factor with having Joe Burrow reunited with Jamar Chase, so they're familiar with one another. So right away, you're gonna have that connection with each other. The problem with this pick, though, at least for me, is that they didn't address the offensive line later in the draft. They didn't get a quality offensive guard or tackle, what have you, in the later rounds of the draft. They could have with their first pick in the second round on day 2, but they decided to trade down in the second round for more picks later, when they could have used their first original pick. I forgot what order they were in, but they could have used their second round pick, their first one of day 2, for the best remaining offensive lineman. This was like a deep O-line class, but I don't know why the Bengals were not interested in drafting at least one very good O-lineman. So I think having Jamar Chase helps the offense, but it also helps even more when Joe Burrow is not running for his life every play. And the Bengals better find some offensive line help. Otherwise, we're just going to be going through this rinse and repeat cycle. And I just don't want that for Joe Burrow. And then at 7, the Lions ended up taking offensive tackle Penei Sewell. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So I originally had him going to the Falcons because they needed O-line help too. But it should help them nonetheless. The Lions are addressing the offensive line, and they managed to address the offensive line a lot in this draft. And by the time the season rolls around, Jared Goff is going to have a lot of protection. He is really going to have that really rock solid like O-line that defenses, I think, are going to have a hard time getting through that line. The issue I have with the Lions in drafting Penei Sewell is that they're getting a quality tackle. They don't have somebody to throw for Jared Goff to throw the ball to. They didn't address that till the 5th round, and I'm just wondering, is there anyone for Jared Goff to throw to? I'm just curious. So at 8, the Panthers took South Carolina corner J.C. Horn, and prior to day 2, the Panthers picked their 8th consecutive defensive player in this draft. Now, I get it. The defense sucked last year for the Panthers, and in all honesty, it's a decent pick. It's not a terrible pick, but this wasn't their top priority. They needed a receiver more than anything because you lost Curtis Samuel. DJ Moore is there, but that's really your top offensive weapon for Sam Darnold. Really. Hell, if the Panthers didn't like Sam Darnold, they could have drafted Justin Fields right there. They really could have, but they didn't. They also could have drafted. Who else was there? I'm trying to remember these names. They could have. They honestly could have drafted Devontae Smith. They really could, or Rashad Bateman. I mean, Bateman is a little high for 8, but still, you could have drafted a receiver. And the Panthers really need a wide receiver. Because, like with Jared Goff, who the hell is Sam Darnold gonna throw to in Carolina? And then the Denver Broncos at 9. They selected a corner, Patrick Surtain. I like Patrick Surtain when I did that scouting. And just like with the players I mentioned in the previous teams that beforehand, this is not a knock on them. This is not a knock on any of the players. I just have an issue with the teams that drafted them. Like, why do the Broncos need more corners? I looked at their depth chart, and there are so many of them. And granted, they're not all going to make the 53-man roster come September, but still, corner depth is very important, but the Broncos did not need a corner here. There were still some quality corners in the Denver defense. Surtain is very good, but I don't think the Broncos needed more depth behind that position. So thanks to the Broncos and the Panthers, I literally said this on draft night. The Cowboys are fucked. The Cowboys literally lost all their plans to draft Patrick Surtain. That was their guy. That was their guy they wanted to draft. But they couldn't get him because, well, the Denver Broncos and the Carolina Panthers screwed everything up for them. So what they do next? They decided to play buddy. Jerry Jones called up what's the Eagles general manager's name? Howie Roseman, whatever. Jerry Jones decided to call up his boys up in Philadelphia. Yeah, they made a trade down to 12 with the division rival Eagles. So the Cowboys were just like, yeah, I don't know what to do here. And you know what? We're gonna fuck shit up even more. So the Eagles went back into the top 10 at the very end of the top 10, to be honest with you. So the Philadelphia Eagles selected Devontae Smith from Alabama, so he could go into Philadelphia. He's also reunited with his quarterback, Jalen Hurts. So another reunion of sorts there. So I actually like this pick by the Eagles. So Jalen Hurts gets his buddy back, and now they have a top receiver in the receiving game. Now, it'll take some time for Devontae Smith to adjust to the NFL, but I think he has some untapped potential once he gets acquainted. But here's where I thought was like the big time move of the draft on draft night. Obviously, the Niners made the big jump pre-draft, but this was the big jump on draft night. And that was from Ryan Pace, of all GMs. Ryan Pace, the Chicago Bears, made the biggest jump of the night, going from 20 to 11. The New York Giants traded down to the Bears spot. So the Bears gave the Giants their 20th pick, their 5th round pick last week, and then a 2022 first and 4th round pick. And what did the Bears do? Well, they said bye-bye to their Nickelodeon valuable player Mitch Trubisky and said, hey Justin. Yeah, you, Justin Fields. You're going to Chicago. They went and drafted Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields. And I gotta say, the Bears actually made a ballsy move for once. They finally went up, even though they gave up the farm for this guy. They made a desperate and possibly, maybe, depending on how it goes, franchise saving move. It possibly saved the jobs of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy for another year or two. And as I mentioned in my scouting episode of this podcast, Justin Fields is as tough as they come. He's got a strong arm. He's a good dual threat QB. I think him and Trey Lance, along with Zach Wilson, depending on how Zach Wilson does, they have a lot of upside in the NFL. But only time will tell. Only time will tell if the Bears have rectified the mistakes of getting Rex Grossman, getting Jay Cutler, and especially the MVP, Mitch Trubisky, all those years ago. We'll see what happens with Justin Fields. Now, the Bears went on to support Justin, but we'll get to that in a bit. And then this is where the surprises ended. At pick 15, Mac Jones, his slide finally ended because he went to the New England Patriots. Now, I told myself, and I know some people like out in the media or here on YouTube or other podcasting space that cover sports too. I told myself personally that if Mac Jones didn't go to the 49ers, like the media was hyping up to be, I personally thought he was going to the New England Patriots because Bill Belichick's still thriving for that Tom Brady-esque quarterback. You know, the one that stands in the pocket, but he's still accurate and smart and careful with the football. And Bill Belichick literally didn't have to do anything. He literally waited around at pick 15, and Mac Jones was right there for the taking. Now, Mac Jones will have to get better at reading the field faster, and he'll have to try to move outside the pocket. He can't just sit there like a sitting duck like Jimmy Garoppolo is currently doing in San Francisco. He's going to have to move outside the pocket, make plays outside the pocket, because if he doesn't, then he's not going to have a lot of long-term success in the NFL. But nonetheless, for as much shit as Niners fans like myself gave about Mac Jones the last month, I think that he's in a very good situation in Foxborough. He's got a lot of new receivers that Bill Belichick signed. He's got a defense that's coming back from injuries and opt-outs. Personally, I think he could beat Cam Newton out of the starting job. Mac Jones could be the week 1 starter. He's got the tools necessary to succeed. He's not athletic, but he's got a strong arm. He's got good accuracy. He takes care of the football. He's got pretty much what Bill Belichick is looking for. So if you're on the Mac train of sorts, the mac and cheese bandwagon, then if you're a Patriots fan, you could be looking towards Mac Jones being your starter early next season. So we'll see what happens there. Now, as for the rest of day 1, like personally with some of the moves that I liked, the LA Chargers taking offensive tackle Rashawn Slater at 13. I really, really like this move by the Chargers because they're going out of their way to ensure that Justin Herbert is not playing behind a crappy offensive line. They want to ensure they believe in this dude, because honestly, look at the success that Herbert had last year behind terrible O-line play and terrible coaching. He was doing everything he can to get his team to win. And they also got a corner in the second round on day 2, and Asante Samuel Jr., who can provide the Chargers a much needed boost on defense. So the Chargers are slowly crawling their way back up in the AFC West. Now, obviously, you got the Chiefs with Mahomes and them rebuilding their offensive line, but look out for the Chargers, man. Really look out for the Chargers in 2021. And if Herbert really excels in next season, especially now that he's got a much more solid offensive line, really look out for them. And then the New York Giants, in their new spot at 20 with the Bears, they took a wide receiver in Kadarius Toney of Florida. So I've yet to see more highlights of Toney, but with the ones they showed on ESPN on draft night, he's pretty good. He is pretty good. And all I could say with this move by the Giants, Daniel Jones literally has nothing left for him. He literally has no excuses. He has no excuses for him to be this bad. Like he has everything in front of him to succeed. He's got Saquon Barkley coming back, and he's got a whole chunk of receivers waiting in the wings, like Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard, Golden Tate. I don't know if Evan Ingram is still there, but if he is, then there. Now they drafted Kadarius Toney. Daniel Jones, if he still sucks in 2021, if he's still Danny Penny's throwing these free turnovers to all the defenses, then I don't know what to tell you. I really don't know what to tell you for all you Giants fans. It's not the player's fault. It's Daniel Jones' fault, man. That's just an indictment of how bad Daniel Jones might be. So that was day 1 of the NFL draft. Again, the second half of the NFL draft was just, at least for the first day, was the back half of the teams like Tampa Bay, Green Bay, and then New Orleans, trying to find that best available player left in the first round. And yeah, there's honestly not much to report there. So let's now talk about some winners and losers and neutrals overall in this 2021 NFL draft, in my opinion. Let's start with the New York Jets. They ran Sam Darnold out of town, and they did what everyone expected them to do, and that was draft Zach Wilson from BYU. Then they did what they didn't do with Sam Darnold by trading up with the Minnesota Vikings, and they used that Seahawks pick from the Jamal Adams trade to get to that position. And with that pick at number 14, they drafted a quality offensive lineman. I forget the name, but he is a really, really good lineman that could protect Zach Wilson on week 1. Then they also furthered their case that they're more willing to commit to Wilson long term by drafting a wide receiver, a running back on day 2, and then that's pretty much it on offense. And then day 3, they went to backload the defense. So all in all, the Jets are doing their due diligence to ensure that they don't make the same mistakes from the Sam Darnold years. Now, again, whether the actual results pan out on the field remain to be seen, but for now, the Jets honestly nailed this. They really went out of their way to ensure that Zach Wilson is going to have a bright future for now, at least in the NFL. It's now up to the actual results parlaying itself, like positively, in the years to come. And then we have to give the Chicago Bears some credit in this draft, because even though they gave up the farm to go up from 20 to 11, they took that gamble and they got rid of Mitch Trubisky, and they got their potential QB saver, the right one, mind you, in Justin Fields. And they used the rest of the draft to do what they could, use their remaining picks that they had left to surround him with good enough talent. Now, again, like with the Jets, it depends on how they do on the field. So I like what the Bears did to address the offensive line, especially on day 2. They got this tackle named Tevin Jenkins. He's a very strong, hard to pass tackle that uses his raw power and proper technique to beat the opposition, and he protects his QB at the same time. So look for him to do that more in Chicago, whether that's protecting Andy Dalton or Justin Fields. So the Bears also got a receiver behind Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller in the 5th round. So all in all, the Bears are ways away from being the cream of the crop of the NFC North, especially with a certain quarterback that's higher up in the North, being some cuckoo. But the draft was a very good step. It was a very good step for the Chicago Bears. Staying in the NFC North, the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings also won this draft because they addressed most of their team needs, also while navigating through this draft process as well. They addressed their team needs, and they managed to get some draft haul too. They started the draft on day 1. They traded down with the Jets to 23, and even though they're at 23, they still were able to get a tackle they desired in Christian Darrisaw, who didn't allow a single sack last year thanks to his quality size and body control. Then they managed to use their 2 extra 3rd-round picks from the Jets to select another guard to bolster their offensive line. But this was the surprise for me. They took a quarterback. They took a QB by the name of Kellen Mond from Texas A&M. And from the highlights they showed on ESPN, he has some decent upside. He's got a strong arm. He has the athleticism that Kirk Cousins lacks. So he's pretty much a decent dual threat, but he can be pretty inconsistent. So with Kellen Mond, he could sit behind Kirk Cousins this season and maybe the next, because his Kirk Cousins contract, it's pretty hefty, and I don't think the Vikings, for as possibly mediocre Kirk Cousins is, they don't want to get rid of him. They just don't. And if this Kellen Mond guy is good, if he does well in the action that he sees, Kirk Cousins can have a serious problem in his hands. All in all, a pretty successful draft for the Vikings, because they're able to get some decent to good depth position players at defensive end, running back, and corner in the later rounds of the draft, along with drafting the offensive linemen that they did in the earlier rounds, as well as getting a quarterback in Kellen Mond with some upside. And then we have the Baltimore Ravens. They entered this draft with 2 first-round picks. As I mentioned in the previous episode, they got the 31st pick from the Chiefs in the Orlando Brown trade. So they used the first pick on a receiver named Rashad Bateman, and they used that Chiefs 31st pick to get a outside linebacker, Odafe. Wait, I'm probably mispronouncing that. Although they didn't get a replacement for Brown in the draft, they signed 2 undrafted tackles that they hope will produce down the line and protect Lamar Jackson. So for now, some part of the offensive line may still be weaker, But for now, the offense can finally have some balance in the passing game. So Lamar Jackson doesn't always have to be running. Like, the play calling doesn't have to always call for Lamar Jackson, running the football. So now you have Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman for Lamar Jackson to throw to. Now, as for the losers, we got to look at the Cincinnati Bengals, man. Like I said before, they went into this draft having to address a lot of needs. They weren't going to address all of them, but they had to address a lot of them. And I don't think they were able to nail on a lot of them, especially in the first round. Like I mentioned, they had to prioritize something, and whether it was the right one, it's really up to debate, man. Again, I personally don't mind Jamar Chase going to number 5 because the Bengals needed a top receiver now that AJ Green is gone in Arizona. But the problem was they didn't draft a quality offensive lineman in this draft. So I deem the Bengals losers. They had an opportunity to do so in the second round, but they didn't do it. They did not do it. Then we have to look at the Seattle Seahawks. Yes. Why am I calling them losers? It's not because they're the Niners NFC West rivals. They didn't take advantage of the very few picks that they had this year. They didn't nail on any of them. They only had 3 picks this year because of the Jamal Adams trade last summer. But again, they failed to capitalize on them. They failed to capitalize them in a quality manner. They used their first pick that was in the second round to draft a wide receiver. And I don't get why they need more receivers when you already have some depth behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So I don't understand why the Seahawks needed even more receivers. I don't know if that receiver they drafted in the second round is going to see playing time on the field. But we'll see if he does well or not. They desperately needed more depth at the quarterback position and the offensive line because, well, the Seahawks offensive line particularly has sucked in the last 5 years. And you wonder why Russell Wilson wants to have more say in personnel decisions in Seattle. So Seattle needs to use their 3 picks wisely, and they didn't. They really didn't. And then we have to look at the Green Bay Packers. They are really big losers. I think they're the biggest loser of this draft because they were already dealing with a lot of issues, especially a big-time major issue that still lingers in this offseason, 1 week in after the draft. Because just hours before the draft even started, Adam Schefter, ESPN NFL insider, senior reporter, he broke up a then bombshell that Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to go to Green Bay. He doesn't want to play for them anymore. And then I was just like, at the time, wondering, like, wait, why now are they just talking about this? Why is this news just breaking out now? And why all of a sudden is this being made public now? It's like, it's kind of out of left field all of a sudden. But then as the weekend progressed, there were other details that were made public. Like the ownership, front office, the coaching staff flying out to Rodgers' home to convince him to come back to play for them next season. And Rodgers like, no, I don't want to play for Green Bay ever again. And it was also the Packers' failure to properly support Aaron Rodgers on offense. And the straw that broke the camel's back was Rodgers not knowing about the drafting of Jordan Love last year. And there's the straw that really broke the camel's back about a receiver that the Packers released. But I don't recall them reporting on that. But still, Rodgers was pretty much in the know about this. He pretty much made this public himself too, because he was at the Kentucky Derby that weekend, and he pretty much confirmed it that this rift between him and the Packers was real, because he was disappointed. He was pretty much disappointed that this news broke out in the first place. So yes, this rift is pretty much real. I know you Packers fans that are out there that are probably hearing this for the first time, especially if you're a casual Packer fan. And I am sorry. I am sorry that your franchise quarterback wants out of Green Bay. And for as much as the Packers are trying to avoid all this, they didn't help themselves. They really didn't help themselves in this draft. Going back to the draft, they used their first pick on a corner. Now I get it. Kevin King got burned in the NFC Championship game, and the corners in the later half of the regular season and in the NFC Championship game, they didn't do particularly well. But still, they really used a corner in the second round when they could have used it on a wide receiver to help out Devontae Adams. Like, come on, man. And no wonder why Aaron Rodgers wants out of town. And I get it. For as much as you could say Aaron Rodgers is to blame for being a toxic diva or a bad teammate or what have you, for wanting out of Green Bay, the Green Bay Packers organization, the Green Bay Packers front office are much to blame, have so much more to be at blame here. Because in the last decade, since Aaron Rodgers became starter, replacing Brett Favre, and ever since Aaron Rodgers led the Green Bay Packers to that Super Bowl 45 victory, what have the Green Bay Packers done to properly support Aaron Rodgers on offense? I mean, they got Devontae Adams, they got him Aaron Jones, but they were all in the later rounds of the draft. There was nothing in the first round. They were all defensive players before 2020. And that draft in 2020, that was the first offensive player. And you already know who it was at this point, Jordan Love, that quarterback. And if you heard those fireworks back there, that was not fireworks for Green Bay. So, for as much as you want to place fault on Aaron Rodgers for wanting out, I have to side with him on this situation. Like, I'd be pissed. I at this point, like, I don't want to be complacent. I don't want to be complacent with what my organization is doing. Like, they haven't provided me ample support to succeed, because the Packers aren't doing anything to provide his side of the ball to succeed. And the way they drafted this weekend, it's only going to emphasize how much worse this situation is going to get. And if I'm Green Bay, and yes, even though I'm just a fat dude sitting in a chair telling them this, I'm telling Green Bay right now, they better figure out a solution. They better find a way. They better convince Aaron Rodgers hard to stay in Green Bay, because otherwise this can get ugly very, very quickly, as even more ugly than it already has been. Now we get to the neutral players, the neutrals, who both won, but also kind of has questions going for them. The San Francisco 49ers. Yes. Why is my team kind of a winner / loser? Like, why? What questions could I possibly have for my own team? Again, I admit I marked out when the Niners completely dispelled the Mac Jones media narrative by selecting Trey Lance. But now that the hype has completely cooled off, I'm just concerned. I'm kind of concerned. Again, he's just a raw prospect, and I know the upside is high, but at the NFL level, it's It's very, very different. It's a different playing field. And I'm just concerned once he steps out on the field and he does bad, that all we're going to hear is that he's going to be he's just an overhyped player that we were all praising him to be. So there's pros and cons to selecting Trey Lance, but hopefully that this gamble pays off. And as for the Niners in the rest of the draft, they addressed their two biggest concerns, which I thought they won at, because they addressed the offensive line and the secondary in this draft. They got a really big guard in the second round, two corners in the much later rounds, and all of them look really good from the highlights that I saw. But I just wish that they drafted at least one receiver. Now I get it. They signed someone in undrafted free agency, but still, I really wish they could have drafted someone instead of signing a multitude of running backs, drafting a multitude of running backs. I mean, it's fine, I guess, but I just wish we prioritize getting more receivers, because we don't know, like, in the consistency of Deebo Samuel. We know how well Brandon Ayuk can do, but we still have Jalen Hurd, and there's still questions about him and his health. So overall, I think the 49ers did pretty good to ensure that there was depth behind their priority positions in the offensive line and corner, and they got the right pick at quarterback and for the future. I just wish they would add more depth to their receivers, because as it stands, it doesn't look that great. And then we have the Washington football team. The Washington football team is my other team that I kind of have questions about. They did decently well to address the secondary. They drafted a linebacker and a corner in the first and third rounds. I just kind of wonder, why didn't they draft a quarterback here? Are they waiting to scout for next year's draft? Or I don't know. I'm just kind of like wondering why didn't they go for it? They could have shot their shot at least in the third round. They could have gotten a David Mills or a Kellen Mond in the third round, or at least the second. But I don't know. I guess they're content with Ryan Fitzpatrick for a year. And if I don't know, they may have a very, very big gambling of hope that Taylor Heineke can do something for them. But I don't know. I think they could have like drafted a quarterback. But other than that, their defense looks to be even stronger than last year. So Chase Young doesn't have to do everything now. And the offense, I just have to wait and see what they do. So those are my winners and losers and neutrals of the 2021 NFL draft. I already talked about day one. Let's talk about some questions I have going forward. I have like a few of them to close out the show. And the first one I want to ask is, I just wonder if the Bengals are going to address that offensive line, because their offensive line last season really sunk, and it came to a point in time where the offensive line sucked so bad, especially in that game against Washington, where they couldn't contain Chase Young, that Joe Burrow got hurt. Burrow got hurt. He tore his ACL. And do the Bengals really want to experience that again? Do they really want to waste Joe Burrow's like prime years playing behind a crappy offensive line, like a very worse offensive line than what Deshaun Watson has gone through, than what Russell Wilson has gone through, than what Patrick Mahomes, like makeshift offensive line, just went through in the Super Bowl? Except that Joe Burrow's playing for a currently crappy organization right now. I just wonder, the Bengals, are they gonna commit to fixing this offensive line? They better. As for the Bears, who starts week 1? Does Andy Dalton start? Does Justin Fields start? There are a lot of things to consider. Like, how is Justin Fields going to do in training camp? If they have a preseason, how is he going to do with his time on the field, with preseason games or game familiar with the second team and first team reps at practice? It all depends on a variety of things, as well as learn how fast he gets adapted into the playbook, as well as Andy Dalton too. So it'll be an interesting competition for the Chicago Bears on who gets to start week 1. And I know a lot of people are clamoring for Justin Fields to start week 1 over Andy Dalton. As for who gets to start week 1, will Mac Jones actually get to beat Cam Newton for the starting job? Now, again, with Mac Jones, he's the second most pro ready behind Trevor Lawrence. He's like a pure pocket passer that Bill Belichick is seeking very much. He's smart, takes care of the football. He's very accurate. Again, because he's a pure pocket passer, you're not going to get much athleticism for him. But still, I think he's the quarterback that Bill Belichick is looking for. And only time will tell how Mac Jones does in camp, in preseason, if he can beat Cam Newton for the job at some point. As for Trey Lance, is he going to take over as a starter at some point? We'll see. We'll see. Out of all these players that I mentioned throughout this episode, who has the best chance to win Offensive Rookie of the Year? Who has the best chance to make a impact in their first year? I think there's a lot of candidates. I think Jamar Chase. If Joe Burrow can escape this offensive line, I think if Justin Fields can get the starting gig at whether it's week 1 or at some point during the season, he can make some noise. And who knows, maybe Trevor Lawrence could too, but we'll see. Well, there's a lot of things. And then last but not least, it's not draft related, but what's next? What's next for Aaron Rodgers? What's next for the Green Bay Packers? How are they going to resolve this? How are they going to try to patch this rift? How are they going to patch this relationship? Because they seriously have to. They really got to get their shit together. Like I said before, if they don't, then you're going to see a lot of unhappy people, not just on the player side of things, but on the ownership side of things. And you're just going to have this holding pattern that you're like prior to the allegations that you saw with Deshaun Watson and the Texans, that you're now seeing with Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. And do you really want that again, Green Bay? Do you really want that? I'm just saying, deal with it now, or you're going to suffer through a lot in this coming season. But that is my recap, my thoughts, winners, losers, neutrals, questions going forward about the 2021 NFL draft. Ah, man. Now that the draft has come and gone, I have to wait 4 more months till the freaking NFL season starts. 4. If there's a preseason, I could care less. I really could care less. I mean, sure, we get to see what? We get to see Trey Lance, Mac Jones, and like all the rookies play in their limited playing time if there's a preseason. But still, I'm just like, I want the NFL, man. I want NFL to come back. I mean, I just want football to come back. Wrestling sucks. Wrestling sucks right now. NBA is it's very and then MLB is just boring as hell. I'm really clamoring for the NFL to come back sooner than later. But anyway, That's it for this episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Make sure to follow me on social media and Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. Make sure to follow me and listen to me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Anchor FM. And if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you'll be notified of each and every upload, including episodes and extras. And hopefully, whatever happens going forward with the NFL, it'll be interesting. And I'm excited for next season, especially for my Niners. Man, it should be fun. It should be fun, especially with the schedule coming out next week. I'm hyped. I'm really hyped. And let's hopefully this wait will subside. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. However you're tuning in into this podcast. As always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports and wrestling. Very cold in that lasagna. And until next time, peace out. Take care, everyone.